So let it be written. So let it be done. This is Tabletop Terrors, and we're going to talk about encounters. This is going to be a deep dive about building an encounter, and that's what we're going to do. So where do you start when you're building an encounter? I guess that's probably the first thing to figure out. What do we do?
So, I mean, in most instances, at least for like a campaign or a one-shot, you kind of have a guiding point of like, if the party's been working their way towards the vampire's lair, then obviously it's going to be a vampire or whatever, things like that. But in this case, we don't really necessarily have a super solid like narrative point to, I think, work from. So I think we just kind of just picking something more open, something that can be kind of put wherever, and then kind of work from there. Sometimes I think some of the easiest things to start with can even be like location, like where is this happening? Because that can guide and refine, I think, a lot of elements on its own. Like a fight in a building is very different than a fight like in a cave versus out in the woods or whatever.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think too, it's cool to talk about this because a lot of times it's easy to make the process seem like some mysterious far off thing of like, oh, it's time to make the encounters. What? And sometimes it's just like, no, just pick a thing and go with it. And there's really kind of no wrong answer. Just so I will leave it to you, James, to choose where, based on that, does city or cave sound more interesting to you? Or do you have like a different idea of where we can set this encounter?
It's been quite some time since we've done something like this, but the last time we did it, it was in a cave when you and I made an encounter video. So
okay.
Let's go with city, because I think city, not only are there usually cities everywhere, but it can be so unique. You say city and it can be any number of places within some sort of city. So let's go city and maybe try and refine further. Are we thinking fantasy, kind of like, standard fantasy until we go off the rails here?
Sure. I think that's probably the most useful.
So yeah, some sort of city. So then in that case, do you want to do more like rundown slummy part of the city, or like the more sort of hoity-toity, or maybe like just middle of the road? Or
so for me, I like to like we talked about in our other video, I like some sort of mood or some sort of mustard. So I like to make at least the part of the city that the encounter is taking place in unique in some way, whether it's under construction or something that's like has some character to it. So I kind of like that. Maybe it's under construction. So there's parts of it that are closed off, or maybe there was just recently some sort of a disaster there, like a fire, something that would make it very unique outside of it being just a city, but it could also be surrounded by the trappings of regular cities. So you can kind of mix and have more in your toolbox. Does any of that hit you guys?
Yeah. I like the idea of it being sort of like, maybe even not just like a mundane fire, but some sort of like arcane fire. So you can have some like lingering magical effects too, that might still be, around. So it's like a part of the city, that was kind of off in one corner that was like hit by some arcane disaster that sent a whole bunch of it up in flames a while back, and now it's starting to be rebuilt, and there's kind of the beginnings of scaffolding and stuff like that we can throw around there, but it's not repaired yet.
That's rad. Yeah, I see. Already I'm like, cool, this is a neat visual in my mind's eye of like, I see these like tiny flickering flames that have not quite gone out, these like embers that are maybe like orange with like purple swirls and stuff, just weird, but it's still a city, and it's surrounded by alleys and different, things that maybe were untouched by the fire. So that sounds cool to me.
Yeah. And I also like the idea. So I'm imagining sort of wooden buildings with stone outside of it. I'm sure there's like technical terms for building that, but the idea being most of the stone sort of had been knocked down, when the wood kind of deteriorated due to this magic. So there's I'm seeing it in one of these buildings, or like in a series of them, kind of. So there's scaffolding on the outside of one, maybe, but maybe it's happening on the inside, but a lot of it's open air because the roof and everything was destroyed. And so there's kind of like a big playground, but there's, like you said, these magical effects that are in different areas. There are places to fall off or knock enemies, potentially places to jump over to the other, scaffolding right across, but who knows? But I'm imagining kind of maybe second or third story high up with an alley down below.
Yeah, that sounds really cool to me.
Yeah, that's cool.
So now we've got, we'll just assume whatever party is around 3 to 5 people. And I guess we won't dive too deep into the actual mechanics so that this can stay very, usable for any level. But so now, all right, what kind of encounter? Like when you guys are planning an encounter, there's obviously, there's traps, there's environmental stuff. Are you going to like pepper all of that in this area, or are we talking combat? Are we talking about escaping some sort of like flames? Like what are you thinking in terms of what we do?
So I do like the idea of there being some combat there. I think that makes sense, right? There's something to fight potentially. I like the idea of adding something else that the players will have to do. So I'm thinking that the reason construction has been halted and the reason there wouldn't necessarily be people or construction workers there is because the fire, they didn't realize sort of the level of the degree to which the fire was still burning. So it's not like a huge roaring flame, but there's little pockets in maybe some of the wood. It's like kind of hanging on. And basically, I see it catching back, and we're either sent there or while we're fighting, I say we, like we're the party, while the party's fighting, they need to put these fires out or do something that helps delay it so that the rest of the building doesn't burn down while they're in it.
Yeah, it could even be a sort of like escape timer thing. Like as this fire is starting to flare up again in this building, at least that, these, sort of stone foundations and wooden frames that are kind of left standing here are going to rapidly deteriorate as the fire like kind of reflares. And if you don't get out of the building in time, then it's gonna, come down around you, or the floor will collapse out from under you, as the frame weakens. So it's kind of an element of like, we're fighting, and also we need to get this fight done quick, or try to find a way to escape, or else this place is going to go down.
Yeah,
If we're in it when it does, then that's bad.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so especially in that case, rather than them trying to put out the fire, maybe they have some way to slow it down a little bit, but it's really just delaying the inevitable until they can get out or kill the enemies or something.
Yeah, I'm into that. And so, I like putting some sort of a paradigm shift into the encounters that I build. And sometimes this is just, I cram way too much in there, and it's like what is every encounter is like its own little campaign. But so as an example though, one of the things I'll do, and now that I'm going to tell you this, I'm going to tell everybody who's watching this, and so it's not going to work as well. So I'm telling you my secret. So I purposefully mention things in passing that I'm going to pull the reveal off of later, so that I have hung the lantern, but it is among other things that I have hung. So you just don't even know, like, oh, okay. As an example, I would put some sort of, I can't think of what to do in a fantasy world, but like as an example, it would be like I guess it would be, so like there's this tree and someone has planted this tree in memoriam, or like there's this crane, like something where I'd say, yeah, and there's some construction equipment or whatever, or there's this tree and it seems kind of like, oh, someone planted it there. It's like a sapling in memoriam or whatever. And then what I would do is like halfway through the encounter, I would shift the paradigm so that tree was actually a major part of the encounter. And it like immediately started growing, and it was like growing out of the body of a lich or something. Like something crazy where that was the cause of the fire, or something like that, where it'd be like, what? Oh my God, this tree that he mentioned 3 times, it's like weak, and So I'm not saying we have to do that exactly, but that's what I love to do. So if we could work some sort of paradigm shift in there, that would be nice for me. Doesn't always work.
Yeah.
It doesn't always work. Sometimes it's like, wait, what? The tree is what? The fire? A lich?
So at least for me, like the twist sort of things like that, it's easier for me to like add those in last.
Okay.
So it might be helpful to like figure out like what they're fighting and kind of what this, the specifics of that
Totally.
are, and then we can kind of find a way to throw a wrench in it,
Love it.
at the end. At least that's how, at least for me, it tends to be easiest.
Sure. And that makes sense. I guess I just wanted to lay the groundwork now, so it wasn't, we're 13 minutes into this and it's like, guys, I have an idea. And you're like, what?
Well, you got to mention it now so you can reveal the real idea later. No, I was totally.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I'm with you.
so I agree that we can workshop it. What I'm thinking though is that it will likely have something to do. We haven't touched on why the fire was there, has started again, or so it might be something to do with that. Like you said, the cause of the fire, or maybe something trying to put it out. But we can kind of, as we get more details, try and tie them all to that so that it is really cohesive when you have that.
Exactly, and I agree. And I think so. Next, maybe choosing who would be there, why they would be there. Now, again, Jeff, you mentioned, assuming that you're running a campaign, you could connect some dots here. This would be where you'd bring in the NPC and their motives and people who have, in your party, hey, this is where you can find your dad's journal, whatever. So so we're going to assume that those things exist. And if they don't exist, do that. Find pieces of what your players are interested in, or find people in the campaign already and tie their motives to this place or this fire. But again, creating this in a vacuum, who are we imagining being here? Like, are we looking monster? Is it people fight?
So I think the first thing that came to mind for me, and I think sometimes people, I think, get a little bit too hung up in trying to follow a logical trail to well, okay, if this is what would be here, and it's just I think it's totally okay just to kind of be this is what I want to put in here, and then we can find a reason why.
Yeah.
So I think some sort of, I think almost a multiple. So there's maybe 2 or 3 people, and then a creature of some sort that these people are allied with or working with, or is a pet or companion of theirs or something like that. So you can kind of get a couple different humanoids, because I think humanoids make for good fights and they're easy to tweak mechanically. But creatures can be super evocative too. So I think maybe it's a mixed bag. So there's, let's say, 3 people of whatever specific, race and motive and all that, and then 1 creature that goes along with it.
That's great. Can I just say something real quick?
Yeah.
You just remember what you were going to say? I was just, for the viewers, I think this is the perfect time. In the comments, what would you put in this encounter? So we painted this picture, all the things we've described. What would you put in terms of a little bit of combat, creatures, humanoid, whatever? Put in the comments how you would fill this encounter and with what creatures and why. James.
So I don't know to the level that I believe in supernatural things or sort of things to that degree, but I think I've learned that my superpower is when somebody says, don't forget you were going to say, it is to erase it from the tomes of the world. With that said, I think I do actually remember. I like the idea that the creature is somehow causing the fire and the people are trying to not let anyone know that, right? So I'm seeing a cover up of some sort, and it's maybe a mage sort of, I say animal, but creature handler, the guy that knows about it, and then 2 lackeys with him that have no clue. They're I imagine them as the guys, the wildlife guys from Parks and Rec. So Andy Samberg and Bill Hader, not that comical, but just there's a monster that's creating arcane fire in a building. They don't know what's going on. They are not the highest paid. They are lackeys. But then there's another guy that probably casts spells and knows about this thing. And this thing is doing something that's causing a fire, but not malicious, is what I'm imagining. I throw a lot of stuff, so feel free to pick all that apart. But that I'm seeing sort of a paradigm shift there, Tim, where this is a creature that has the capacity to destroy buildings and kill people, but isn't necessarily malevolent and trying to do that, to start seeding that idea. And nothing is sacred. Like I said, I kind of painted a lot of the things, so feel free.
I think at least mechanically, that's a very good structure where you have a creature which will have its own abilities, a spellcaster, and then 2 non-magic people.
Mm-hmm.
So I imagine one of them's a melee fighter is going to get in close and get down and dirty with the party, and then the other one's maybe a supportive, probably also because depending on what the creature specifically does, either a ranged support or a melee support to the warrior, just to kind of spice up the ways which the party can be attacked. So you have magic, you have melee damage, you have ranged and kind of utility support, and then this creature which is going to have its own sort of skill sets.
Yeah, I dig that a lot. And so I keep thinking in terms of when you mentioned that the creature is causing the fires and then having those people and then the mage, what popped into my head was, I don't know the exact details yet, but I think that it would be cool if the fires are on purpose, but the mage is covering that up. So it's covered up under like, hey, so I think that maybe this particular creature has some sort of arcane fire, and there is a reason, whether it's a ritual or maybe it's the tree we talked about, where there's a tree in the middle, and if that tree can be burned by this fire, it can char it or it can do this thing. But I like the idea that the mage is totally covering that up, and they're under the guise of perhaps them looking for this creature, but in fact the mage is trying to protect the creature so it can burn up whatever. I don't know if that's too hinky, too finicky, but it adds a layer, and that might be something to save for later as a twist.
Yeah.
But again, that's kind of, honestly, that's my biggest downside, is that I have these story ideas and I need more of what, like Jeff, what you said, where it's like, okay, mechanics and those kind of things. So I think this is a good conversation. Right, structure. So that might work well in an episode of a show, but it might not be the best thing to have to telegraph all that stuff to the players,
Yeah. And I think if you take that same idea and just back it up a little bit, in the sense that I really like, the things I love about it are that I like that they're protecting the creature, right? It's a dangerous thing, but they're not trying to kill it. And that's why it would probably be easier to kill it than have it burn down buildings and stuff. And I love the idea that the mage or these guys have some sort of secret about what's really going on. Because again, it's already a cover up where there's magical fire burning down buildings, and probably, the city at large has been told that a fire broke out. No mention of this creature, and it's all this big secret. So yeah, whatever that secret is, I think will really lead us to the cool part, or the cooler part.
I think here's an idea of like maybe this wizard and these people are looking for something specific in this part of the city, and they unleashed this creature here basically to cause the fire, to get people out so that they could look around for something that they need to find here that's important.
I love it. Yeah, and then that would make me believe that the item would not be damaged by fire. Whatever that is. Whatever they're looking for would probably be, it doesn't have to necessarily be activated by fire. It doesn't have to be that connected, but I would imagine that they're intelligent enough to use fire on purpose and not flooding and not pestilence, because this thing is impervious to fire, whatever it is.
Whatever the MacGuffin is. Right. Yeah.
So I like.
I think to add to that, the one thing I would say is maybe this encounter is them now trying to recollect the monster, and they're having trouble. Right? It's done its job. This area is kind of empty. There's still a little bit of the fire. Maybe they have to go find the thing, but their first thing now is to get this creature so it doesn't spread everywhere else. Again, that's kind of a back pocket. We'll see. We'll figure out motives as we figure out the rest, but something like that maybe too.
Yeah,
so then, what? Sorry.
I said I'm into all that. I just was...
Oh, okay, yeah.
So this is my biggest problem with coming up with an encounter. We have a really cool framework for a story, but I'm pretty rotten at now taking the pieces of this. If I told someone this story, they'd be like, oh, that's really neat. It inspires me. But it's still, it's something that if I ran it, it would be marbles. I'd be like, there's a wizard. I know that much. There's Bill Hader's here. And Andy Samberg.
Yeah. So the way that I would start to sort of break some of that stuff down is, I think it's important in any fight to have multiple sources of damage that can like affect different numbers of people and like do different damage types and things like that. So imagine like this creature is probably going to have like AoE fire, like a fire breath, a cone breath weapon, or something that can shoot out, or fire that it can like send up from the floor, some sort of like thing. So the party's going to have to like make dex saves or take fire damage, and or con saves to, something like that. So that way there's, the people who have super high armor classes don't just get a free pass. They're going to take damage, half damage, even if they succeed, sort of thing. And also, fire damage. So a lot of people won't have resistances to that, where they might have, a barbarian might have resistance to slashing and bludgeoning and piercing. So something like the creature deals AoE fire damage mostly, or at least like has one big AoE attack and then a couple smaller
Sure.
fire-based attacks. I kind of like this dynamic of like these people not being like the most sort of in tune, strategically or in the know about this sort of magical stuff. So I imagine that they're more sort of, grunt, laborers or just like bandits or warriors or sellswords or whatever. And I kind of like the idea of like one of them sort of being like a trained combatant and the other one being a little bit more scrappy. So I guess in terms of some mechanical spice, what I would do, and of course I'm open to any sort of specific alterations, is to give like one of them like a sword and shield, maybe some like metal armor. So he's got a decent AC, moderate attack. Maybe give him something like action surge or like a battle master maneuver to kind of give that feeling of like, oh yeah, this guy knows how to fight. And then make the other guy a little bit more scrappy and brutish. You could even maybe give him something like the charger feat or something where you can like dash and tackle somebody and make an attack, as part of it.
I dig that.
Or, some sort of something like that where you have this one like super fluid trained like rock star warrior sort of guy, and then the other guy's just a little bit more just like, I'm just gonna, do whatever and
Like
take
a
people
street
down.
tough, sort of like a street.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm into that.
Maybe a dual wield or something, the opposite of this sword, or sorry, the shield. The other thing I like about the creature's AoE is it sets up that timer we talked about where eventually this building's going to burn down, and it also might affect everyone, right? So if you're in melee combat with one of these guys and the creature attacks both of you, we're kind of setting up that it's not really on anyone's team, so I think there's going to be a lot of chaos there as well.
Yeah.
So I think figuring out the player's goal, which like you said, Tim, we're going to kind of fabricate in this case because we don't have a campaign or anything. But really, they need a reason to be going there. It could be as simple as go investigate the fire. If you're the GM, there's no reason to muddy up the quest or whatever with all of the things we just described. Somebody needs these players to look at a fire. We can do whatever, but the idea being it's that simple to go, well, they need to go in this building, even though they know that it might be on fire. Why would they do that? So we can workshop that, or we can go kind of, like I said, fabricate it and just assume that will be built in for people and the players are going to this building.
I think the easiest, just thing to just reach out and grab is that whatever this wizard and his bandits are looking for, the party also is looking for,
Very good point. Multiple people are looking for this. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, it's something that's important that, obviously this wizard and his, gang of thugs want to get for whatever nefarious purpose, but somebody else hires the party is like, hey, there's this thing in this part of town. It burned down in the fire, but I think the fire might not have been an accident. I think something might have caused it. I need you to get this thing from it. And we know it's dangerous, so we'll pay you or give you jobs or whatever,
Yeah, that's perfect because it just sets it up like, they at least know.
Yeah, and I think something that struck me about the thing you had mentioned about resistances real quick, even if you do have someone in the party that's a tiefling or a dragonborn, someone who would have resistances, that's okay. Don't change it to cold.
Yeah.
Let them feel like rock stars and let them feel like, because now you have one person who can use their thing. It's such a rarity that there's fire shooting out everywhere and I'm immune to fire. So it's like, this is my scene. So it would actually be a cool thing to lean into rather than say, well, the dragonborn and the tiefling, they're immune to fire. So, rather than that, say, oh, cool, this is going to be their chance to shine, but just factor that in when you're building out the mechanics.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's very important to, well, I think there's kind of a couple different angles to go from, and you want across the game to spread them out across all different things where like their mechanics are pretty neutral to it, where their mechanics are benefited by, the player choices and where they're detrimented by the player choices. So, sometimes you would specifically choose cold because last time it was fire and they had resistance and they got to feel awesome. And this time you want them to feel terrified. Or, if you had a super, super tough fight last time, then maybe give them a little bit of a softball this time and let them kind of build up and, feel super strong again.
Yeah.
That's kind of more of a long-term, a meta encounter building sort of thing.
Sure,
but
definitely.
Sometimes reinforcing the player choices to be awesome and sometimes challenging them to sort of confront those choices. I think both of those things are important. But yeah, on all sides it works.
Killer.
So I think the one sort of, I think, sticking point mechanically for me right now is this wizard, the sorts of things that he's going to do. The obvious choice is to have him be a fire wizard because he has a fire creature, but That's boring. So I don't want to do that. So he needs to have some sort of spells that he can cast here. And I want them specifically not to be fire spells. But also not counter to fire spells either, because he's fighting alongside this fire creature. So we don't want him to like neutralize his own friend.
Yeah. I would go for something, and I'm open to whatever. The two things that struck me as, again, I'm all about mood, and there's a really cool juxtaposition that can happen when you have this AoE fire. But when it's the wizard's turn, it feels like a different person, as Jeff, kind of what you're hitting on. But really leaning into it. So the two things that I thought of, one would be, it would be really cool if he was an illusory mage and was using all kinds of crazy illusions, because that would just be super dangerous when there's real fire everywhere, for there to look like it's not, or all of a sudden this player is hallucinating and there's nothing, there's no damage, there's a roof, there's not a roof, it's just really cool. So that was the first thing. The second thing, if that didn't hit you guys right, was necromancy, where it could be kind of cool also to have, but I would go super different with it. Like, I wouldn't just do like an army of skeletons. I would really work to try to figure out how to do something unique with it, and I don't have that right now. But those are the two things that I thought would be a really neat sort of juxtaposition against the fire stuff.
Something that immediately grabbed me, sorry, was just like, this is more of like a scene thing, but I think it lends into that mechanic that you were talking about, which then you could build off of in the fight by, doing specific things of like, they come into this room and it seems like it's, it's not perfect condition, but it's, maybe a little bit unstable. And then suddenly, boom, the illusion fades, and it's like literally on fire now, and it's like going to, fall apart. And then there's this creature that they didn't even see that was masked by this illusion. So you could kind of like have like an unveiling twist as to like how they get into this encounter of like, oh, what's in here? And then you see like this wizard and, two of his guys like rummaging around. And then suddenly you're like, oh, this is okay. And then suddenly just like, boom, the illusion falls away. And it's like, this place is, in bad shape right now. Like, there's already fire. The creature is about to like, boom, maybe even surprise round, shoot a blast of fire at the party in the doorway or something like that,
Yeah. So I do really love that. The major thing I wanted to touch on was what you both did was really cool, because specifically you put it in the way, Jeff, of, okay, well, I don't think it should be fire because that's the same, but it shouldn't be the opposite. The way I see it, this would be somebody that was hired to do this, so it wouldn't necessarily be kitted out for this specific. His job isn't capturing fire creatures, normally.
Right.
So I imagine he would have a mix of spells that would be helpful. So even basically that, but even kind of making it even less specific, where he would have some illusion spells. You would build it kind of like a player character in terms of the spells, where, well, what spells, if it's a wizard or a sorcerer, what spells would they prepare today because they know they're trying to capture a fire monster? Well, they'd have some sort of illusion, like you guys said. They'd have maybe some sort of entangle style thing, like they prepared the tools for this job to some degree, which means that it's not like a video game where it's just like all ice, everything he does is ice. It's just, that's kind of the specific way to avoid that pitfall of it feeling like sort of tropey, I guess is the word I'd use. So yeah, I think that's really cool. And I love that, because it also puts the players in so quickly and ramps it up unexpectedly in a really cool way. It does sound like it's about time for us. Oh, well, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, and, just to kind of play off that, of like, I think you make a good point about like what this wizard is trying to do with this sort of thing of like, maybe he has some like enchantment spells like dominate creature, so he can take control of this creature when he wants to like get out of, and, start to think of it, some of that way too. But yeah, everything that you say there I think is really cool. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's right. I was just going to say it's sounding like we're getting to the point where we have to figure out what this thing everybody's after is. And in the same respect, I'm getting the impression that it's going to be a surprise, or it's certainly not be what anyone expected kind of thing. Like, to me, the obvious one that I don't think works, but is the obvious one, is the creature is the thing. But I feel like we could go a step further than that and make it still something cool, but it doesn't, you know what I mean? Like, to me, that's what it would be, but it doesn't have to be that.
If you did want to go the creature is the thing, which I do think you're right that we should probably take it in a different direction, But if we did want to go the creature is the thing, I would turn it like 5 degrees, and I would make it that the creature is female and just had a litter.
Oh,
and
yep.
The creature's babies are the thing. Because that seems like, oh, that's crazy. And then one of the paradigm shifts could be the whole time is that the wizard is using this illusion to make it look like not, nest of babies.
Exactly, yeah.
It's like this illusion that makes it look like a pile of trash, and then, et cetera. Then the pile of trash fades and it's a bunch. So, and at every point in the encounter, too, you have to figure out you as a game master and you as your players. So if this was me in real life, I would think of the group I was running it for, and I would think what they would find most interesting as far as what the thing is. So we'll use one option is that it's the creature's, babies. The other option I would use, and this is not an answer, it's another problem. I like to mislead, but then do a twist. And as you can tell, right, that's my style. I'll give you an example. I had players in this session we were running, and all the NPCs kept saying, "Hey, we need to get out of here." Now there was a storm brewing, but they said we need to get out of here or we'll be subject to the elements. And like 3 different NPCs said this. Well, then these crazy, like, more or less, steampunk, crazy mutated goblins showed up. And their final line before we ended the session is that, we are the elements. You are now subject to us. And so, like, that kind of thing. So, in other words, whatever we decide the thing is, I would purposefully call it something that would come with baggage and assumptions, and then I would turn that 1 degree.
Yeah. Which, again, I think... Exactly, yeah. Again, you're going to have more things to draw from in a campaign or something because you can sneak those things in earlier. Again, we're kind of starting here. So that sort of thing is perfect.
Like if it was the lock, I would actually make it a tuft of hair. So that it's still a lock of hair, but people are assuming a lock and they're looking for a lot. Things like that. So anyway, that's not helpful in specificity, just in concept, I think.
Another thing I wanted to...
I was going to say, I think Jeff...
Well, yeah, I just wanted to say
one thing. Then were you going to... Sorry.
Because specifically, the idea is it's a video gamey thing, but I would make it eggs, not babies, because eggs are easier to take somewhere.
That's true.
Yeah, and I don't even think we need to like dwell too much on like the specific what the thing is. And something that you could even do if you wanted even like one more layer of like what do we need to do? We need to make a choice. Is like, maybe there's a third bandit, and at the very beginning, when the party comes in, like the wizard throws the box of whatever to this last guy. Is like, you get out of here. We'll deal with these people. Sort of thing. So you have to like, we can't just run past these group of people who are going to try to kill us with this crazy fire monster. But also we need that thing, and this guy's going to get away. Just kind of add like another dimension of like strategy and kind of choice making to it. Which you don't have to do that. That's kind of an optional section.
Yeah, but I think that's a smart recommendation is that I think often you want to decide everything up front because it's easier and more comforting going in to know what the answer is. But I actually think that this is a really good opportunity to show I'm not going to decide what it is everyone's looking for. Like planting that flag and purposely saying, I don't know what the wizard's looking for. I don't know. And doing that, it can feel like you're walking a tightrope without a net as a DM, but I promise you that instead, events unfold, things that happen you could never plan for. The campaign goes a whole nother session, all this weird stuff. Like you said, Jeff, the guy runs away with a box. And then 2 sessions later, when it's time, you now have this totally different frame of reference. You have a different perspective. The characters have made choices. And then you can decide what that thing was. And they will think that you're a genius.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the main thing is I was, when we started, considering that this would be the encounter they find this thing. But I think it's a really good point that it doesn't have to be. Again, we don't really have the arc of a campaign to be, well, is this the end? Is this the middle? But like you said, we kind of don't have to decide. And it sounds like we might be saying, well, this is the middle, and we're not going to say what the thing is, wherever it is. I love the idea of the guy running off because they're still completing their task of, well, what's causing the fire? These guys, it doesn't feel like you've cheated them, but it is still a hanging thread where it's like, well, eventually we're going to have to go find that guy, but we probably can't chase him now. So I think something like that really works perfectly.
Yeah, or maybe they do chase them now, and then it splits the party, and forces one guy to like find a way to track this guy down, even though he's being attacked from all these different angles, and like that makes it strategically more exciting. So whichever way the party goes, there's something to it.
Exactly, because it could also cause the people to get away with the monster, and you've technically failed this first thing.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think it's rad. So, all right. So, what are next steps? What else do we want to accomplish in this conversation in terms of? I think we've got a good high level view. Are we thinking like, okay, this is where we leave it, or do we want to take it one more level down of specificity? And where do you think we should go with it?
So I guess just a couple notes, and we don't necessarily have to figure out like the specifics of like what we would do, but just a couple extra things that I would do for this encounter is I would give the wizard and his 2 or 3 bandits, all of them would have like names for sure that you could call them, and some sorts of like defining characteristic. So it's not just a goon. It's Brendan the goon with a scar across his eye and a sword with serrated edges on it, where there's something which I think it does a lot of things. For one, it makes it so that the party, it adds variety to the fight. It makes these feel like people, first of all, but it's also just easier. That way, if the party's like, I attack the third guy, you could be like, I attack the guy with the sawtooth sword, and the scar. That's the guy that I'm going to fight, It's very easy to do like initiative lists, and stuff like that, where you can just, put in the chat, Brendan Sawtooth, mage guy, and you can kind of just work through it that way, So I'd give them all names. I'd like define some more features for these goons, like specific mechanics, things that they could do. Give them like fun features, cool like battle master maneuvers or feats, or some sort of thing that they can do in the fight. Again, we don't necessarily have to figure out all of those people and all of those details, but kind of spice up so that each goon has their own fighting style, their own weapons, their own features, and things like that we can give them. Because I think it adds a lot of cool like strategic depth and makes them feel more fleshed out as people, that they all have their own fighting styles in the same way that the party has their own fighting styles and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. So yes, as far as the level of specificity, I think that's perfect where mentioning the things that we would dial in, but not necessarily being tied to dialing them in right now. So with that, there's about 1 million ways that you could do the timer on when this building is going to burn down, when the floor is going to collapse, things like that. So we can workshop that or talk about it, but specifically, I would make it, off the top of my head, I would probably give the building sort of hit points, and then roughly just calculate whenever the thing spews fire that it removes some, a very simple counter. And then as it gets lower and lower, you describe that to the players that the beams are failing, that, it's kind of time to get out. And then I imagine them being on the 2nd or 3rd floor, and I would probably at some point block the stairs. So, if they do the fight quickly, they could maybe use those to get out. But otherwise, I imagine them either having to jump into like a dumpster in the alley or trying to make it across to one of the other scaffolding. And then you have that same thing you mentioned before, which is that people get to feel cool. Maybe someone has feather fall, they get to use that. Maybe someone has a magic item that allows them to not take falling damage, or something cool like that, where we don't have to figure out how they're going to solve the problem. The building's on fire and they need to get out of it, and the players are going to come up with clever ways to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think even having like an encounter sort of like timer, where you have like, so in 5 rounds, the building's going to fall. On round 1, because that the creature is the first thing it's going to do is just spew fire. So it burns the back. Round 2, the beams collapse on the staircase. You can't get through the stairs. Round 3, some of the stones start to crumble around you. You have to, maybe make a check to avoid them. You sort of basically have like a scaling. Each round, the environment basically takes a turn collapsing, with the assumption that like at the end of it is when it fully comes down. And you can kind of, again, like you say, narrate kind of each level, like round 3, it's starting to look really precarious. Round 4, like this, you can hear the stone cracking and the wood creaking. At any second it could fall, sort of thing. And then, like you say, have some sort of challenge to get out. You have to leap to the building over, or you fall and use feather fall. You don't have to specifically plan a solution, but know that there's a problem and kind of guide them towards that.
Yeah, I think having a countdown when there's something like a natural disaster or a fire or something like that, and I believe in that very much. Whereas you have just a list of short things that telegraph narratively exactly what's happening, because it keeps the ever-present threat of the fire on the players' minds. If you don't do that, they will forget the room's on fire.
Yeah.
And then when it does collapse, it'll feel unfair and like, what? It was, the whole room is on fire? I just thought that the corner was on fire. So one final thing that I would say is, in addition to that countdown where you kind of just have, I think 6 is probably a really good number, where 6 is the building is fully collapsed, everything inside is smoldering. Like, one of the things that I always find, I started calling them oddities. I like to write a list of things that might be around, just because when the players are getting creative and inventive and they go, hey, I want to look for something that I could use to prop in front of the door, what would that be? For me, that's what catches me the most flat-footed, because I'm like, well, let's say it's I don't know, X or Y, and I come up with it, or the players, I'll throw it to them. But something that really helps me is I'll just do like a list of 6 oddities. And an oddity is basically just an interesting thing that's unique to the construction setting, the city, the fires, whatever it is, so that I've got my little list. And then when they ask to do something or want to explore something, or, hey, what's in this corner? I have a pre-made list of ready-made stuff that fits and it jives. So I would do some things similarly, like I say, like a pile of construction tools and tarps or something like that, so that players get crazy inventive when you just throw that kind of stuff at them. But it's tough for me to come up with good stuff like that on the fly. So the final thing I would probably use to prep is just that after the countdown, I would just have this list of like 6 oddities. So when they start getting creative, I can give them some footholds to climb, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And then I think the last thing I would consider for the encounter is, after it ends, I would remember that the players, potentially unsanctioned, went into a construction zone. It caught fire and they fled the scene. And probably about this time, whatever police might be here are showing up, or at least somebody, civilians. Basically, somebody's going to see them. So just consider what effects that will have. Maybe later, there's a poster of what looks like maybe one of them, they burned down a building, arson, that sort of thing, where consider that a big thing in a big city happened. Somebody saw it, somebody's going to know, and you can tie that in later to make it feel more like a real world.
So I think it might be helpful too, because unless there's anything that we need to add, so if there is, please interrupt and stop me. But otherwise, I think we covered a lot of ground, and like a recap, might be good.
That's great.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Let's do it.
So basically the scene as I remember it, so feel free to interject if I miss something. The party is sent to a portion of this city that had been subject to this arcane fire, with the task of searching for a specific object, and if they can uncover how the fire happened and why, then those things are important too, because it's suspected that maybe it was on purpose. The party is, digging through this rubbled area. They come across one building that, draws them to it for whatever reason. And as they're exploring the second or third floor of it, they come across 4 people. One of them appears to be a wizard. The other is like a fighter. Another is maybe a roguey sort of type look to them, and have specific names and features for them as well to identify them even further. As they're arguing with these people or whatever, suddenly the wizard decides that it's time to throw down instead. And the illusion of this room falls away to reveal that it's actually on fire right now, and that there's this crazy fire creature that was like in the corner, disguised by the magic as well, that'll like blast out a cone of fire at them to start the fight off. Roll initiative, and then one of the goons basically gets a box from the wizard and tries to run out the back, while the wizard and the other 2 goons and the fire creature fight the party. one of those goons is like a fighter, basically. So I give him some fighter or barbarian features, like super melee in your face. The rogue, give him like maybe sneak attack or like the sentinel feat or something like that, so we can kind of play support to this, strong fighter type. And the wizard has illusion and like enchantment magic that he can cast on the party. They have to finish the fight before the building burns down, or it'll collapse with them in it. You can kind of have timers going down of like environmental effects that happen as that goes on. And then, yeah, that's, I think, the gist of it, unless I missed anything.
I don't think you missed anything. I think that's actually the most useful thing. It sounds like, yeah, you know what? When you put it all that way, because now I could run it, whereas before, I wouldn't have been able to piece all that exactly together as we talked about it. But now I'm like, oh, cool, yeah, it's an encounter. All right, yeah, well, good on us. Yeah, so that's killer.
So I think that's the fight, and that's the way that I would run it. Yeah, and of course you can always change and alter, give specific extra details and all that sort of things. But as far as an actual kind of overall encounter, mechanically and narratively, like that's something that I would use. That's very much something that I could see like actually running and making in a game that would be like very exciting and difficult for the party, because there's a lot to sort of work through of like tracking down the box, or is escaping more important, or is killing these guys more important. It's kind of a lot of, it's not just a difficult mechanical fight, but it's also like there's decisions and consequences no matter what the party does. If they track down this box but they don't get the creature, then that's pretty bad. But if they lose the box but they do get the creature, then that's also not great. But it's going to be difficult to do everything before the building falls out too. So I like that it kind of drives at like what's actually most important to the party here. It kind of forces them to ask and answer that question, which I think is always a good extra tie-in to any encounter, combat or otherwise.
Yeah, and I think that this stands as a particularly good example of a prepped encounter, at least in terms of what does matter and what doesn't, because we made a lot of decisions, but we never talked about what the monster looks like. We never talked about its CR, its stats. You can make that whatever you want. You decided not to decide what the thing was. Technically, it didn't matter to the encounter. It matters that there's a monster and there's a thing, and I think that's an important thing to consider. We talked about a lot of the things we feel are important to the encounter, and realizing what things you want to make an encounter out of is good, because we could have spent 30 minutes trying to decide on the monster and what it looked like, but that wouldn't necessarily help us with the timer for the building, for example. So yeah. I think it's a good example of what to focus on and what not to build this sort of encounter.
Yeah, and this is a late addition, but something that I know works really well that I hadn't considered. And this is probably a good topic to can of worms for a separate video, is triangulation. So having 3 different people, factions, or whatever, entities that have slightly different or directly opposed goals. So what it made me think of, James, you talked about the police showing up. There's a guard who's responsible for guarding this building, because I think that would be interesting to have a sort of like, there's this female captain of watch, and her whole thing is make sure that no one gets hurt in this area that is closed, and her job is to make sure that happens. Well, obviously all this stuff's going on, so she shows up and she doesn't have a bunch of reinforcements yet, but there's a definite triangulation here, because now you have someone who's like, hey, we have to put out this fire. What? Are you crazy? Like, we have to kill this. And all it does is present a choice to say no to or yes to. But either way, it just makes it far more interesting, because her report after the fact, imagine if those guards show up and she says, no, it's fine, they helped me. You have a free pass versus, arrest them. You know what I mean? It's just so different. So adding another person who has a totally different interest in the opportunity that's happening in the encounter, it just adds so many layers. So triangulation, I would throw in a female captain of the watch who's in charge of that area, and then just let things unfold. So
yeah, I think another way that you could take something like that too, that could help to spice things up, is like, James, I think you mentioned like that these goons don't really have a whole great grasp on what's going on. So something that you could like sprinkle in that could add some player choice, that maybe some tables would take it, some tables would never, and it doesn't matter. So it's kind of a know your table sort of thing of like, maybe one of these goons, like partway through this is like, wait, what are we doing? Like, this is crazy. And you can kind of like see that hesitation on his face. So maybe you could like convince one of them that, he's on the wrong side of this. And you can see it on his face that he's still kind of fighting, but he's not really confident that he's doing the right thing. And maybe you can talk him out of it. And, maybe he has some information about where this other guy with the box is running off to. Or maybe you just kill him because he's on the other team. Like just little kind of different other ways to kind of add in of like, not necessarily clear, like this guy's definitely going to defect, but sort of, dropping in some seeds of like, one of these guys as you're going, he doesn't seem super in with what he's doing, and that could be another way to triangle it so that maybe he can, then tip you off to the goons. But if you side with the captain of the watch, then she's obviously going to be like, hey, get these guys out of here. Like, we don't, these guys are trying to burn down the building. We need to stop that right now. We don't have time to like sit and have a chat. This place is going down and we need to just put this out, so kind of finding different ways to sprinkle stuff like that in was just another idea that I maybe would use. Maybe I'd save it, but just kind of different ideas, I guess, to sprinkle in to add some spice.
Yeah, and I think all of those choices you've given people really highlights the fact that this isn't just a combat encounter. And more specifically, it's not just a combat encounter with a timer either. These people, maybe they may be able to be bought, but maybe they convince you that we need to help this monster because they're really trying to make sure it gets back to where it belongs. There's so many things you can do, and it's not just a race to 0 hit points or, a race to get the other people to 0 hit points. It seems to add a lot more stuff narratively because, like you said, they might say, or you might have questions about the monster, or they might hesitate for a moment or tell you, or you might hear them talking. All of those things, I think, really spices up an encounter because it's not just, 3 skeletons. Okay, well, I roll, that's it. Okay, done. There's a lot more. So again, it's not the fast food, we killed a couple of bandits real quick on the way here, but it is definitely like, no, I mean, this could comprise most of a session, maybe the first half of a long one. And there's just a real lot there. It's so dense with stuff.
Yeah, and I guess, to kind of close it out, we'll say that everything we've presented here is just a list of choices, and you don't have to decide a lot of these things before the session begins. You can just put down these options and using it as a map that is certainly not the territory. As the players go through and they decide that they're going to, they might, and they will, they'll always surprise you. So immediately one of the players might say, well, who can we find around here that would be in charge? Are there any guards? And that's not something that we talked about up front, but now you're like, oh, well, actually there is. And you kind of look through your list of options and you're sort of like putting it in there. It's like basically what prep is coming up with a bunch of different shaped Tetris bricks. And then as the players come at you, you're like, okay, yeah, that would fit here. And this, flip, this here. All right, got a line, And that's kind of what I want you to think of when you're doing this or when you run this. Just put down a bunch of these options and then, play some Tetris. We're Tabletop Terrors. This has been a deep dive into, just making an encounter, demystifying it, showing you sort of the process, warts and all. If you love fun, creativity, and tabletop games, that's what we're all about. So hit the subscribe button and be sure to get hit the bell so you know when videos like this and our other videos go live. That's pretty much it. I mentioned earlier on, but just a reminder, put something in the comments about, whatever it is that you do that we didn't mention. What would you do differently in this encounter? What stuck out to you? We'd love to hear about it. So you want to do a toast? A little Tabtarian toast?
May you mend the first break.
Sláinte. No, I'm just kidding. May you kill the first snake.
And may you conquer everything you undertake.
Sláinte.
Sláinte.
Stealing my joke.
I